The signal from our executive director. All right, ready to go. Wow. Welcome everybody. I'm Jim Campbell, president of the board of AWA. It's my pleasure to welcome everybody here tonight for the Wilderness and Wildlife Defenders Lecture, our awards, and a lecture by our distinguished speaker. Looking forward to that so much. Just as a way of getting started, I thought, could all the board members present stand so you know who to point your questions to if you need it. Chris Saunders, Dale Dawkins, Jimmy Jack, and of course Cliff Wall is here.
Hi, Gail.
And Gail, yeah, okay. And could we have all our staff stand, please? And staff, I just want a round of applause because these folks do it. So we'll begin with a land acknowledgement, which is so appropriate, particularly for this occasion, but for all occasions here. So this is a piece that I came as prior to the actual land acknowledgement by Cindy Provo, Nausaki Samoan, the Piikani Nation and a member of the Blackfoot Confederacy. And it talks about the spirit and intent carried in a land acknowledgement. I think that's really important rather than just doing that on a rote basis. He says, a common teaching by many Indigenous elders is that as human beings, we did not just arrive in this time and place on our own. We all carry the life stories and lived experiences of our ancestors and those who have persevered so that our generations can live life in a good way. Our stories carried in the land, in the rocks, in the rivers, in the whole environment coexisted in such a way that there was harmony between all beings within creation. We were capable of seeking treaties with the land and her resources to sustain our lives. And we were capable of seeking treaties with each other to preserve life. It is these thoughts and powerful, peaceful energies that we breathe life into when we do land acknowledgements. And I can't think, and given the current state of the world, more appropriate words than these. So, acknowledgement of the land is a traditional custom of the Indigenous people when welcoming others to their land and into their homes. And so acknowledging the land honors the original people of this country. Those in Calgary are on the traditional territories and have been home to many Indigenous peoples from time immemorial. Today, we welcome you from this place called Mohkinstsis, the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, Stoney Nakoda Nation, the Métis Nation, Region 3. We acknowledge these peoples who have lived, worked, played, and stewarded this land. We honor and celebrate these lands, and we also acknowledge traditional lands from wherever you may be joining us today. Thank you. Now, my pleasure to have Cliff Wallace step forward. Probably needs no introduction to the room, but Cliff, of course, is, I think, our longest standing board member and still standing and most grateful for continued presence with us. He keeps threatening to step back when we say he can't, and because his corporate knowledge that he brings to these situations is immense, and everyone knows that if you don't, that Cliff was given the Order of Canada this year.
Good evening. Every year, the AWA hosts the Martha Kostuch Annual Wilderness and Wildlife Lectures. Here we showcase renowned guest speakers. They inform, challenge, and inspire our members, as well as further our mission of defending wild Alberta through awareness and action. The lectures honor Martha Kostuch, perhaps Alberta's most persistent environmental advocate, and we still miss her dearly. She was instrumental in changing environmental processes, laws, and attitudes. My proudest moment was when Martha and I took our Old Man Dam fight to the Supreme Court and won. With the help of great lawyers, First Nations, and the AWA, Friends of the Old Man River won a landmark ruling that changed environmental assessment law in Canada and asserted Canada's shared jurisdiction over the environment, which continues even with the recent Supreme Court ruling. Before passing, Martha asked us to continue to defend the environment in her memory. AWA does that every day in our work on wild spaces and the creatures that live there. Many other wilderness defenders are honored on the Defenders Wall here at the office. They are the giants on whose shoulders we stand. Endless pressure applied endlessly. We have worn down some tough rocks. Tonight, we honor and celebrate Dr. Leroy Little Bear, Diane Pahal, and Mike Judd. They have all helped us enormously in that struggle to advance environmental protection, as well as the environmental rights of all Canadians. Thank you all for your continuing support. And just a note that you will get a brief introduction to everyone here tonight, but there will be more in-depth articles on each of our recipients in the next issue of The Advocate, which is coming out soon. So let's introduce our guests and hand out some awards. I have had the great honor of working alongside all of tonight's recipients in one way or another. And tonight's first Wilderness Defender recipient is Dr. Leroy Little Bear. Leroy is a Blackfoot researcher, professor emeritus at the University of Lethbridge, and founding member of Canada's first Native American Studies Department. Dr. Little Bear teaches law, Native philosophy, and economic development. He is a recognized leader and advocate for First Nations education, rights, self-governance, language, and culture. He is the senior advisor to the Office of the President on Aboriginal initiatives and is actively involved in the university's response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He has received numerous awards and recognition for his work, including the Alberta Order of Excellence and his appointment as an officer of the Order of Canada. He has been a great influence not only in Alberta, but also around the world. One of Leroy's most significant and enduring legacies is the work with the United Nations, where he helped to establish a working group on Indigenous populations. This working group originated the concept and initial draft of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, now ratified by 144 member states. Importantly to Indigenous peoples and to us, he continues to advocate for the return of the buffalo to southern Alberta. Leroy and I first crossed paths during my work with Friends of the Oldland River. I have been most recently impressed by his work on the Buffalo Treaty, reintroducing bison to the ancestral territories of Indigenous peoples on the plains of North America. Dr. Leroy Little Bear, will you please come up and we can unveil your plaque. Smile, take that side there. And there we have it.
I want to thank AWA for the award. And I'm very humbled by it. But on the other hand, I'm so glad to be among you that are all working for environment, wilderness areas, conservation, and so on. And very, very, honored by this award. But I always say, now that I've got an award, I have to work harder. So that's what we'll do and continue to do.
Well, congratulations. Us, we're honored to see you be up on this Wilderness Defenders Wall. Our next Wilderness Defender recipient is Mike Judd. Mike was born and raised on the eastern slopes of the Alberta Rockies and the foothills west of Pincher Creek. I understand he also has a connection in eastern Alberta and Shorebird country where Cleve and I go. He was a longtime AWA director in the 1980s and 1990s. He had that other century. And is a persistent defender of the castle and southwest Alberta wildlands. His education has been a combination of book learning and following old mountain men around the hills. For much of his life, he has been a guide and outfitter involved in dog sled tours, hunting, as well as trail riding along the Continental Divide. And long cross-country ski trips, I understand. Mike is a founding member of Rescue the Rockies, Timber Wolves Wilderness Society, and Foothills Five and Restoration Society. Just watch this space. He has been an intervener at over a dozen regulatory hearings and has been featured in the media on multiple occasions to speak on the Eastern Slopes wilderness and wildlife issues. Aside from his stands on logging in the castle and wells on Corner Mountain Prairie Bluff, Mike impressed me most with his organizing strategies and push for AWA to get out into the communities closer to these wild places we all love. Not only in Alberta, but few know that Mike played a key role in convincing the superintendent of the Lewis and Clark Forest in Montana to keep the area free of resource exploration activities. Mike is no stranger to controversy and standing up and doing the right thing. He has been an organizer and participant in several protests, peaceful protests, and has been jailed twice in different kind of bars than I am. He is still involved in an Alberta Energy Regulator hearing on sour gas well reclamation and was recently involved with a film production, Coming Home, about returning bison to public land, something that we can all get behind, I'm sure. Mike, come on up here and we'll unveil the plaque. There we go.
Hope you don't want to throw me in jail for a third time. I just want to tell you guys, I took a little backpacking trip in the castle this year, in the castle wildland. And I have to tell you that it's pretty wonderful. It took us from about 1974, when we first started talking about the idea of making the castle into a wilderness area, to a little glitch in the government that realized that we were on the right track. And today we have essentially pretty much what we were talking about. The Castle Provincial Park is a different story that needs a lot of fine tuning, as I'm sure you all know. But overall, I think that this organization, because of its persistence and the hearings that we went through together to stop the big oil from getting into the castle, and were indirectly successful at doing, the castle would be a considerably different place if the AWA hadn't been there. And although we lost some of the conservation battles, at the end of the day, I think we are generally winners on that one. There's so much more to do out there, and so many more places where if we keep up the momentum, we could still save a lot of Alberta's public land for our future people. So I have to say I'm very proud to be a part of the AWA, and may the work continue.
Many people to honor, and certainly this award to Mike is long overdue, and it's a joy to see finally added to that Wilderness Defenders wall. Diane, to get Diane front and center on the screen. That's too difficult.
Well, hello, it'll let me unmute. It won't let me use my video yet.
Just click on the name. There we go.
Perfect.
There we go.
Diane, good to see you. AWA's first conservation director and first executive director, Diane was involved in most of the early history of wilderness conservation in Alberta through the 1980s and 1990s. After graduating with an environmental science degree and spending a few years with Alberta Fish and Wildlife, she became one of the first 2 staff ever hired by Alberta's conservation advocacy groups. She was on staff here for 22 years, from 1979 to 2001. For years, she juggled 2 part-time jobs. One was Office of the Environmental Coordinator for 5 provincial NGOs, as well as Executive Director for the AWA. She exponentially increased AWA's budget from a mere $10,000 and no full-time staff to over $250,000 with 3 core staff. She initiated annual fundraising programs such as the Calgary Tower Climb for Wilderness. Sharp as a whip, she dedicated her passion, tenacity, creativity, and strategic thinking to activism and advocacy for wildland and wildlife conservation. For the last 10 years, she has had the good fortune to live within one of what I call a power spot on the planet in Waterton Lakes National Park, working with Parks Canada. Canada awarded Diane the 125th anniversary commemorative medal in recognition of significant contribution to compatriots, community, and Canada. Over the decades, she has also mentored many who were new to conservation or environmental advocacy. She is perhaps most publicly known for frontline campaigns to protect Canada's national parks, as well as the wildlife, wildlands, and wild rivers of Alberta and British Columbia. Most memorably for me, she stood tall in defense of Corner Mountain Prairie Bluff in southwestern Alberta, alongside other defenders like Mike Judd and Vivian Ferris. Diane is on sabbatical on the West Coast and unable to join us in person, but here she is, kind of in person. Very two-dimensional though. She's much more three-dimensional than this. So we're saying congratulations to Diane. I will virtually lift the veil on the plaque. Thank you, Diane. Also long overdue. It's great to see you going up on the Wilderness Defenders Wall. We will get to the mini plaque, trail guide, and mug, and we'll do some pictures with our other people here before we go on to the next awards. But would you like to say a few words from the coast?
Sure, and people who know me know I'm generally not a person of a few words. I do want to say first, hello, bonjour, oki, in honor of where your traditional lands are, where you're hosting this from. And I also want to say, recognize that I'm on this Nanaimo traditional lands. People may know them as the Nanaimo First Nation. A very open and welcoming people. So if you're ever in this region in Nanaimo, please do stop in at their offices. They would be happy to see you say hello. Yes, I'm on a year sabbatical. I'm kind of on a bit of a 10-year sabbatical from frontline advocacy work. because I switched gears a bit and went to work as a public servant, and put on the Parks Canada uniform. And as they say, a change is as good as a holiday or a break. And my 10 years with Parks Canada have felt like 3. And with that, I got to work with school groups, etc., take people into the outdoors. I realized I was spending too much time behind a desk and I needed to work some more in the outdoors. And now I'm on sabbatical to plan my next 10 years. And of course, that's going back to conservation advocacy work on the front lines. As you know, we are in a crisis situation with the loss of species, loss of ecosystems, climate change, and all the stresses that's placing on people. And I'm not there in person tonight because I just could not justify putting more CO2 pollution in the air to come, even though I'd love to see you all in person. Yeah, it's so instead of an airline ticket, it'd be great to, if you could just send a little donation off to any one of the Good First Nations groups that are working on climate change and action on climate change. And of course, there's frontline advocacy work to do right here, including on the island of Gabriola, where I am right now. And I'm looking to the future and new things to do, new challenges. And of course, getting an award causes you to think back. And I was thinking back over the 23 years of advocacy, and what's something really important that I was a little piece of, but didn't get done. And I still wish it could be done. And I think it's in the power of people to do that. And that's, I recall at a Canadian Environmental Network meeting, there still is a Canadian Environmental Network, a contingent of some First Nations people, including the late Milton Bourne with the Tooth, asked that a piece of the Canadian Environmental Network budget be set aside for the use of the First Nations or an Indigenous Environmental Network in Canada. He and those with him were the first people to push with that and there were some initial meetings. Sadly, the Canadian Environmental Network, which did at that time get federal funding, didn't set aside that piece of a budget. And as you know, generally with First Nations, their economic well-being is behind that of the dominant society in Canada. So I'd like to think that the frontline conservation organizations in Canada could set aside a piece of their budget to go directly to the First Nations advocacy organizations working on conservation and climate change. So there's something to work on for the future. And of course, when I come up with ideas, I know I have to work on them. So that's a piece of my sabbatical. Looking forward. Thanks, everyone. Wishing you all the best. Keep in touch with your special place in nature. It'll see you through the toughest times. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. So we'll get you the little gifties somewhere along the way, one way or the other. We have probably no stranger to hiking guides, and I'm not sure Mike needs it. We probably need him more than he needs this. And that's a high quality and great drinking class. But if Mike and Leroy could come up, we'll just get some pictures with your personal plaques here, which you will get, and we'll get that to yours to you as well, Diane. Make sure I got the right ones. There's both the take home. And the other one will stay on our wall here. And if you could stand somewhere up here so Lindsay can take your picture with your plaques. In front of, yeah, that's probably pretty good.
So you're not on the screen. You want to be using the screen there.
And if you want, you can come up and get your glass and go later. To round out the awards, we have the Great Gray Owl Award that honors the great spirit of volunteerism that the AWA is renowned for. Those volunteers provide the extra oomph and expertise to deliver everything from our adventures for wilderness to networking with communities and other NGOs, financial advice, and even real estate transactions. So our first recipient, Gail Dawkins, is a devoted mother and grandmother. From her earliest memories, nature has been Gail's haven. As a realtor in Edmonton, Gail enjoys sharing her deep respect for Alberta's breathtaking landscapes. Her days are defined by staying active, whether running, hiking, skiing, or paddleboarding. Not too much of that right now. This commitment fuels her spirit and connects her with the beauty surrounding us. For Gail, caring for beautiful Alberta isn't just a duty, it's a passion that resonates in every facet of her journey. In the rhythm of running trails, scaling peaks, and navigating waters, she's discovered the perfect harmony between family bonds, personal pursuits, and the responsibility to preserve the natural wonders that make Alberta truly enchanting. On the volunteer side, Gail has assisted the AWA through her work on the board since 2011. She has organized successful AWA member and fundraising events in Edmonton in a variety of venues. And over the last year, she was instrumental in concluding the sale of land in the Edmonton area that was bequeathed to the AWA by our longtime colleague, Hugh Wallace. So congratulations, Gail. Thanks for your ongoing volunteerism and contributions to the AWA. Please come up and we'll
Thank you so much. I always feel like a bit of the, can't even think of what the term would be on the board, but I knew this was something I really wanted to be a part of, and I knew what I could bring to the board, and it certainly wasn't the expertise that I have been completely wowed by our staff and our board members, but I'm so glad to be here, and I'm so glad to have contributed, and this is a great honor for me. Thank you.
So Nathan, there you are. Originally from Vancouver Island, Nathan moved to Alberta to pursue a degree in piano performance at the University of Lethbridge. Look at all these connections. Later on, he switched gears and now works for Legal Aid Alberta as a criminal defense lawyer. Quite a turn. He loves to explore the less trafficked areas of Alberta in the grasslands, parklands, and foothills, which he says is lucky for him because he has an acute fear of heights. Although he loves going on long hikes, he often doesn't make it far if there are birds to be seen. We know all about that. Nathan began volunteering at AWA in 2017, and that time he has done everything from painting the office steps, tending the AWA garden, losing pounds of sweat dressed as AWA's mascots, leading campaigns like the fight to protect wetlands at Ricardo Ranch in Calgary, bringing attention to OHB use in the McLean Creek area of the Kananaskis, and of course, his work with AWA's board. Nathan also sits on the board of Calgary River Valleys and More Neighbors Calgary, in an effort to bring more attention to the relationship between municipal development, climate change, and biodiversity. Congratulations. Thanks, Nathan, for your ongoing volunteer.
For the recognition, maybe hear what Gail said, and that when I joined the board, I was also blown away by the expertise of everybody that served on it, and volunteering with AWA was part of the motivation for me to go back to law school and learn about better ways to protect the environment. Even though I ended up in criminal law, hopefully one day I'll end up on this side of things as well. But it's when they first told me they wanted to nominate me for the award, my first response was, well, and there's a lot of other people that have done a lot more. So that's really speaks to the quality of the organization and the people that are involved, and that there's so many people that can get this and would be worthy of it that have done so much for AWA, and it's great to be a part of that and to contribute a little bit to it as well. So I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
With their class. Wherever a photographer will see
Gail stays.
Leroy Little Bear present this year's lecture, and we'll have a chance to ask some questions at the end to Leroy. So thank you, Leroy. Come on up. From anywhere, but the owl seems to train on you very well here and there.
I like to walk around.
Yeah.
Okay. Исторнаков Пикаскинева Индаксикс Кайнал Ксалкита Пила Передухту Цитап. I was talking to you in Mongolian. In our Blackfoot traditions, we introduce ourselves by our name. My name is Ikaskini, referring to Lowhorn, which comes from the buffalo. And we're of the Small Robes clan, when it's not quite the right term, but it'll do for now. Small Robes clan. And we're again sometimes referred to as blood tribe, and we're of the Blackfoot Confederacy. I would like to, before we start, tell you about, way back, some of our older people over here that are my age will appreciate that. And that is the old days. There used to be these TV antennas on the roofs and so on. Well, there was these couple antennas, one of them across the street from each other. And for a while, in fact, for a long time, they were sitting there, on. But eventually, one of the antennas couldn't take it anymore. And told the other antenna, hey, you know what? We've been sitting here on top of these roofs for a long time. And a lot of times we end up talking to each other through those TV shows and so on. We should get married. Well, the wedding wasn't very much to talk about. But they had fantastic reception. My PowerPoint. I'm not sure that it'll ever win an Oscar. But I would like to say that, hey, for all the work each and every one of you are doing with regard to ecological issues, environment, climate change, wilderness, and so on, I'd like to award each of you an Oscar. So keep up the good work. I want to talk a little bit about the impact of us humans, if you want it to be a little bit more scientific, Homo sapiens, you know, and our impact on the environment. And because so often we talk about the ecological role of different types of animals, but we never ask ourselves or really talk about what the ecological role of human beings really is about. We never ask that of ourselves. And if there's anything you want to take home tonight, take that question home. That is, what's our ecological role on this earth? So let's get started with the show. Yeah. One of the things that I've always remembered, and I carried around as a, if you want to call it, a bumper sticker. And that is, somebody once said that a true leader, which all of you are, a true leader is one who changes the conversation. In other words, not the same old. So the thing is, we've had Truth and Reconciliation here in Canada. We've had COVID, okay? And both of those are examples of something, you know, that has stopped us in our tracks. And it's given us the opportunity to stop and reflect on what we're doing, talking about ecological role of human beings. It has stopped us to kind of reflect, because every morning, think about it tomorrow morning, every morning we get up and we think we're getting up to the reality. Well, that's not true. Okay. What you're waking up to is a human interpretation of the reality. And we'll explain that more. So I always have fun with scientists. Okay? And sometimes we get into good conversations. But let me, as it says, let me throw this notion at you if we're going to try and change the conversation. That is, in Western science and Western science thought, we come at things from chaos over order. In other words, there's a belief that there's an underlying order. In other words, this is the way God made it. Remember Einstein? I used to drink with him. He, you know, he came out with that famous saying, God does not play dice with the universe, which means this is the way God made it, this is the way it'll be forever and a day. And if there's any kind of chaos, it's us humans that are bringing about the chaos. So our thinking process is such that, hey, there's an order over here, and we're causing that chaos and so forth. And our scientists are trying to discover, hey, what did God really make? And it's kind of like if you can picture a box about God's creation, and it says, no, we're trying to make holes in the box so we can peek into that order that God made. See, in other words, our scientists, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to penetrate that box. So, now, in native thought, it's the opposite. It's the opposite. In other words, in our way of thinking, hey, everything is about chaos. It's about constant flux, constant motion, and so on. And our culture, our way of thinking, our cultures, our languages, all that goes with it, like social values and so on, are attempts to bring about order. See, so consequently, in indigenous science, you cannot separate the culture from the science. But in Western thought, hey, the experimenter kind of separates himself from his experiment so as to be objective. See? Well, and if we can picture that underlying assumed order like a box of goodies, our science is an attempt to puncture the holes in the box to peek in and find out what that underlying order is. I promise I'd play with your minds. Next. See, as we've explained, Blackfoot assumption is that there is an underlying chaos beneath the order. Guess what? Culture is the attempt to bring about the order. See, so in other words, it's almost like we're always surfing that flux. See, and we're trying to find regular patterns, so to speak, so that we can bring about those regular patterns, and we can hang our hat on them, because those regular patterns are the very things that make for you and I's existence. And if I can just throw in, we did never stop and think about it. But you've all heard of protons and neutrons. Okay, well, protons and neutrons have to be in perfect harmony. If there was just a little bit of tweaking on either side, proton and neutron, none of us would be here. None of us would be here. Oh, see, that's the order that we're seeking and so on. So that's now, it's a great debate about the coming into existence of the Homo species. Okay, there's all kind of stories, propositions, and so on about how we came to be. And, you know, from over 1 million years ago with Homo antecessor and so on, you know, these are the kind of things that scientists who delve into those matters come up with. But see, one thing they all agree on is that human beings, Homo sapiens, came out of Africa. They came out of Africa. Well, that's something we should also stop and think about, because who is it that is from Africa? Well, it's our Afro brothers. See, if it wasn't for them, we may not be around either. See? So we should think about those type of relationships that come into being and so on. See? Somewhere in that mix and closer to our time is Neanderthal men, one of our closest relatives. The Homo species is about 250,000 years, plus or minus. Modern human beings, as we know ourselves, we've been around about 100,000 years, plus or minus. Okay. Now, the thing about that is, I used to text Neanderthal. Where is he now? He's nowhere to be seen. We were next door neighbors. We grew up with Neanderthal. But tweaking, talking about tweaking, there must have been something that just wasn't quite balanced on, that they disappeared and we're still around. See? And how long are we going to be around? In fact, scientists now who study these type of things are already talking about the next species. In other words, hey, maybe we're just a passing phase. Well, you'll see why I'm bringing these kind of big factors and so on that you can dream about tonight. Next. Diversity and strength. Why is this important? Well, we are here to talk about the Anthropocene, that is the impact of humans on the earth. Let me use the fish to illustrate what I want to bring across. The fish is believed to have been around, think about it, 450 million years. That's how long had the fish, at least according to estimates and so on, the fish has been around 450 million years, okay? And in my hypothesis, when I talk and think about these things, so on, that my wife and I talk about in the mornings over coffee and so on. Whenever, you know, my hypothesis that the fish, however and whenever it came upon the scene, wandered with its sentient, you know, capacity over a broad spectrum of sensory intake, wandering over the broad spectrum. In other words, if you can imagine, you know, existence, you know, put boundaries on it, he was going back and forth, that fish. And what happened was that by going back and forth over a broad spectrum, he became a very generalist being, you know. And I say about us, Homo sapiens, hey, I can swim a little bit, nowhere near as good as that fish. I can run a little bit, nowhere near as fast or as well as a jaguar. I can climb trees a little bit, but nowhere near as good as an orangutan. But I can do a little bit of all those things. See? And if you were to take that fish, throw him up on the beach, and you threw me in the water, I bet you I'd last longer than the fish would. Why? Because I'm a generalist. I can cope with, find new ways and so on. Whereas the fish, over those 450 million years, come down to a narrow niche within which to exist. See, in other words, the fish kind of over specialized. So over time, the fish became more and more specialized to a particular environment. Now, the specialization to a particular environment resulted in less and less need for language. Okay? As he was wandering around that broad spectrum, hey, it's kind of all like us sitting in a coffee shop and we're just talking away a mile a minute and so on. That's because each of us are specialists and we're trying to get across to the other specialists all of our experiences and so on. But if we were all the same specialists, hey, we know everything you know and that I know, what do you start to talk about? If we're, you know, those are some of the ramifications of specialty. So the fish started to lose its language, okay, as it specialized and so on. And as an example, as I always throw out, is if I said Recips locator, how many of you would know what I'm talking about? See, that's legal lingo. See, in a room of lawyers, I don't have to explain it. But to non-lawyers, I can spend a whole day having to explain what Recips locator is all about, which in short, simplistic terms is about reversal of the onus of proof, you know. So, but the fish eventually lost all its language Because every fish, from the day they're born, they know what it is to be a fish. They don't have ID problems. As I jokingly say, I looked in the mirror this morning and it looked the other way. I got a little bit of an ID problem. I always tell my friends, hey, when I start having these ID problems, I get on Air Canada to remind myself that I'm a plains Indian. Takes a lot more to think that. Now, see, if we were to look at ourselves on a geological scale, we are brand new kids on the block. Say, 450 million years of fish being around. We're brand new kids on the block. Similar to the fish, we are roaming that sensory spectrum. Say, and so we do need a way to communicate with ourselves. So we use language as for communication, see? Well, guess what? When we start classifying animals, we think that language is probably the most important thing in terms of intelligence. See, we say we're higher than those fish because we know how to speak. Wow. Say it twice. See, because we're just following in the path of that fish and so on. That, as we said, we are roaming that sensory spectrum, and that our sensory equipment, to the point of our capacity. As new kids on the block, we are very much generalist in nature. We're jack of all trades, but masters of none. Next. So, the disappearance of language, science estimate that we are starting to develop language. We started to develop language about 50 to 70 thousand years ago or so. But in my view, we've always had language, whether it was body language or what, and so on. We've always had some way to communicate, so on. So language is that we use it as a criterion to compare ourselves to other animals and to move ourselves up the intelligence scale. See? But in my view, language is close to its zenith. And as a means of communication, witness texting now, and less and less use of language within a specialty. So in other words, within a specialty, there's a whole lot less need for language because we all understand the same thing. It's when there's variation and diversity that you need language. The point to be made is the more we specialize, the smaller the spectrum of the totality of existence we draw from. In other words, are we following in the fins of the fish? But, as we said, we always use language as a criterion for putting ourselves at the top of the heap. Next. Now, many scientists limit the Anthropocene to the 1940s to the present. But in my view, it goes much further back. Here, I'm going to use England to bring out the point I want to make. I'm using England because it is an example of a society whose metaphysics and paradigms dominate the globe today. Okay? We usually refer to it as Western way of thinking, Western science, Western education, and so on. So, have we ever talked about Buffalo education? No. So, England and the Anthropocene, when I say Anthropocene, goes much further back. All you have to do is think about the pollution of the Thames River and the resulting big stink back in the 1800s. See? In other words, the impact of those humans at the time on the land, the water, and so on. That's England, whoever its indigenous people were, has been subjected to several takeovers. Celts, Romans, Norsemen, Anglos, Saxons, Jutes, and the Normans were the last major takeover. Okay. But if we were to ask the person on the street in London who the original people were, they couldn't tell you. In other words, those takeovers have all but erased what would be, unique and true English culture. That's all but erased. We, indigenous people, complain about colonization. Well, we've only had one major takeover. Second, think of England. They don't even remember who their indigenous people are. So, all that, has all been wiped out by those takeovers. England became a multicultural society. In other words, generalists, culturally speaking. But that generalist nature turned out to be one of its strengths. That generalist nature served it well. It came to dominate the world until it started to engage in specialization. Think back to that fish. Today, the name of the game we're going through is specialization. We use a specialty as our identity. You talk to somebody on the street, first thing they want to know is, what do you do? What do you do for a living? And we come back out and we say, oh, I'm a teacher, I'm a lawyer, I'm a scientist, I'm a plumber, maybe with pipe dreams. That's what, so, for instance, specialization as a system works if all the specialties are in sync. If not, we run into that chaos we talked about earlier. Next. So, all societies at one time or another lay claim to a territory. However that society comes into existence, eventually we claim a territory. Okay? And within that territory, a culture arises from the mutual relationships we have with the totality of that environment. A culture consists of paradigmatic or physical notions and values and customs. The paradigms are the tacit infrastructures we carry around on an everyday basis. And those infrastructures are the things that the members of the society use for their beliefs, behavior, and relationships. The metaphysics of Western world are based on, okay, now, you need to take notes here. They're based on a stagnant worldview. Remember Einstein, okay? God does not play dice with the universe. Everything is about matter, knock on wood. You know, knock on wood, everything is about matter. And everything is inanimate in Western thought, except for you and I. And yeah, maybe those dogs out there that are being taken on a walk every day. You know. And, you know, we look at things in isolation. We may start out broad, but we eventually keep narrowing down, just like specialty and so on, till we come to the point. Say, and when we come to the point, that's when we say, like in school, that's the right answer. That's the right way to do it. Say, we come down to the point. That's what we mean by we isolate things. We are future oriented. In other words, if you can picture yourself standing by a river, the Bow River, we always look upstream. You know, hardly ever look downstream. We're always looking upstream. We're future oriented. And we've come to the point where we can say, been there, done, did it. Let's move on. Because that's why we have stacks of books in the library. Say, been there, done, did it. It's up on the shelf. If I need it, I can always go along. But for now, I don't have to worry about it. And all of this is captured in the language, in this case in English, and which is a very materialistic, noun-oriented language. I may be jumping and let me finish with this. And our main referent is the notion of time. Okay? In other words, we always carry around that clock in our head. Well, let me tell you, there's no such thing. You know, it's all a human invention. What we're talking about as a clock is, just think about it, anybody can do it. And that is, take a body, a planet or a star, and you measure another body with it and measure the movement, keeping one thing still and allowing the other one to move. See? And when there's two of them moving and so on, that's where Einstein comes up with his general relativity as opposed to specific relativity. See, but you can do that. In other words, you can only invent your own clock. You know? So the thing is, we're very time oriented. I might be a step ahead. Let me backtrack a little bit on that noun-based language. Okay, one of the things that comes out of Euro languages, like English, is the ordinary English sentence is A is B. That's the ordinary English sentence. A is B. Have you ever thought of if A is B, if they're the same, why do I need B? Say, why do I need B? If A is B, then why do I need B? Say, there's a whole ramification in terms of thinking processes by having A is B. There's dichotomies and either ors and so on that all develop from that notion. So in English thought, we always need the other. Okay. Now, Hugh spoke too, talking about wilderness, talking about buffalo. Our elders will say, I am the buffalo. For us, this is me. That buffalo is over there, the other. Say, our elders will say, I am the land. I am the environment. So very different thinking process, very different reality structuring that arises. Next. These metaphysics give rise to social values such as bigger, newer, faster, higher, more, and so on. Think about refrigerators. Is a refrigerator from 1960 different from one in 2023? But even refrigerators are now going by, but 2023, pretty soon they'll come out with a 2024 model. And yet the basics are all the same. Just ask Pete the plumber. And so, Steven Weinberg, a favorite scientist of mine, he's into quantum physics, says, he's a Nobel Prize physicist. He was talking about the notion of objectivity. As we said, scientists like to pride themselves that they're very objective in their work. Says, objectivity should be something that doesn't refer in any specific way to human beings. It should be something from which everything else, including anything you can say about chemistry, biology, or human affairs, can be derived. Now, it shouldn't have human beings at the beginning in the laws of nature, and yet I don't see any way of formulating quantum mechanics without an interpretive postulate that refers to what happens when people choose to measure one thing or another. Okay? So in other words, in our Western science, it's all about measurement. If it's not about measurement, it's not scientific. I hadn't heard a scientist that said, let me measure love. Can't do that.
Yeah.
See? So love is not scientific. So out of that, these notions that even scientists are come up with what we refer to as the interpretive template. Next. In other words, the paradigms or metaphysics of Western society are, they have a special interpretive template. And the reality you see is a product of that template. In other words, that's what you wake up to. And it is not the reality. In other words, it's not that objective reality. It's the human interpretation. That interpretive template becomes the foundation of Western science and methodology. While Blackfoot, for instance, have a different interpretive template, and therefore a different approach to science and a different methodology. Western science is all about measurement, as we said. If it is not subject to measurement, it is not scientific. Blackfoot science is all about relationships. If it is not about all my relations, and I'll explain, it is not scientific. Next. You will recall we said that England or Western society became as a generalist society. But my interpretation of the Anthropocene has become more and more specialized, resulting from linearity, binary thinking, and so on, which are products of Western metaphysics. That specialist paradigm, and especially the social values that come with it, has resulted in a human footprint on the earth. Remember, more, newer, and so on. See, that human footprint is a product of our Western metaphysics and social values that arise from it. So, from the concrete jungles to ecological makeovers of the real jungles. And we can say, we're talking about wilderness. We're trying to kind of recreate that notion of wilderness. But think about it. Every major river on earth has been dammed, okay? The plains of North America have been totally changed ecologically due to pesticides spread all over the place. And all the bugs are dying, okay? And here I'm including the bats as part of the birds and so on that depend on those bugs, okay? So now the bats and the birds have to travel further to get their food. Before they used to be able to feed locally, but now they have to fly much further to get their food. And in the process, spread COVID viruses to humans. So that's the chain that's been happening. So on. Yeah. Our freshwater fish are dying from mining pollution. And we just heard about the court case and so on about one-time use plastics and so on. Our ocean fish are dying from garbage such as plastic because the oceans are just big garbage dumps, not unlike the Thames River and the resulting big stink. We now have think about this. We now have more livestock, domestic livestock, than we have wild animals. So we, Homo sapiens, live, when you think back, we live in that very narrow gap of ideal conditions for our existence. Just as we were saying about the protons and the neutrons, there's just one little click on the balance of those two particles, we wouldn't be. Well, we live in a very narrow gap of ideal conditions. So if we play around, remove back to ideal conditions or introduce new ones that'll upset that condition, well, we wouldn't last too long. See, and that seems to be the road that we're going down. So all those bugs and plants we call weeds and so on, that are a nuisance on our constructed lawns, all contribute to an ecological balance that makes for our existence. Large-scale eco change means we will go down the Neanderthal freeway. In other words, will be a massive case. Next. So, one of the things we've been doing, talking about wilderness, conservation, and so on, is that the buffalo, for instance, is a keystone species for the environment and Plains indigenous culture. Wherever it roams, it eco-engineers the land. And other animals, insects, all of which in turn contribute to ecological balance. That ecological balance brings about the ideal conditions for our continuing existence. So it's through its running around, trampling, wallowing, and even its grazing habits, the buffalo brings about ideal growing conditions for all kinds of plants. So we need the buffalo. In other words, we humans have kind of overdone it and tried to do it just through human efforts. I don't think we succeed. We need help. And that help can be from the buffalo to help us clean up the mess we Homo sapiens have brought about. Next. So, the buffalo, if you think about the bovine species with which the buffalo is about, the scientists tell us can be traced back about 15 million years. But in less than 50 years, we humans have almost wiped out that buffalo. Just think, 15 million years of environmental and ecological knowledge which have been lost had the buffalo totally disappeared. It would have been a sad day, not just for buffalo, but for us. But we are scared of the buffalo. We don't even want to give it the status of wild here in Alberta. But see, think about it. That fish has 450 million years of knowledge that he has accumulated. That buffalo has at least 15 million years. And we humans 250,000 years at the most. See, that's why we say we're brand new kids on the block. So, that's. So, again, human actions are playing a role in the creation of it, the extinction freeway. For the fish, just think of the cod fishery. I was just telling some people today about the indigenous people over there in the Maritimes, that they had a barter system that they used to have. They called it credit card. You know, the same is going for the salmon, the krill in Antarctica. Next time we buy krill oil, think about Antarctica. If the fish are gone, we will go with them because omega-3 is an essential fatty acid that our bodies can manufacture, can't make up. Our bodies cannot make omega-3 on its own. There are a whole bunch of other animals that need that fatty acid. Fish provide, including cattle and horses. So if there's no omega, which we can't produce on our own, hey, all of a sudden, those cattle all begin to disappear. And even our spoiled pig dogs. So we need that fish, but what are we doing to it through our own wildness? Next. So, having said all of the above, wilderness and conservation is an uphill fight. We all know that. So, with good intentions about wilderness and conservation, we have a tremendously strong uphill opponent, which is economics. And economics is primary in our modern day society. But as conservationists, we come behind the economic processes to try and clean up the mess our economies bring about. It's like parents cleaning up after the kids. So, in other words, it's the economy that's out front. And we're kind of behind that, that economy. And it makes up a whole bunch of mess here and there, environmentally, climate change wise, and we're behind trying to clean up the mess. Well, the truth is, if we're going to really get anywhere, it should be the other way around. In other words, environment, ecological balance, all those things should be primary, and economics should be secondary. That's the bumper sticker we need to be driving around with. Otherwise, we will be knocking on Neanderthals' door. Next. Remember the fish, as we've said before, 450 million years of memory and knowledge to draw on. The buffalo has 15 million years of memory and knowledge to draw on. Humans, only 250,000 years. And, we're like teenagers. Remember, teenagers are teenage kids. They know everything. They know everything. We can't tell them anything. So rather than attempting to manage fish and the other wildlife and so on, buffalo and so forth, let's build a partnership with them. See, right now, we're trying to manage them. Okay. Well, rather than trying to manage them, let's build a partnership with them. Let's let them talk and we listen. Next. How do we understand wilderness? Well, wilderness is about no or very little human imprint on the land. But we have a language problem. Some say wilderness should be about naturalness. Some say wilderness should be about restoration, because there is no place on earth that has been impacted, that has not been impacted by humans. So we have a lingo problem. Why? Well, our specialties result in specialist silos from which we think, speak, and operate. So to a large extent, we are not about wilderness and conservation. We are really about maintenance of the specialist silos. And these silos, they don't talk to each other. Specialist silos result in definition after definition after definition. It takes a while to get to the conserving and wilding. In other words, we have so many definitions, we keep breaking it down, and we end up talking about it so often, we never get to the doing. Next. So, one of our lessons that I like to share is that there's an Indigenous story that goes something like this. And, I don't quite remember every aspect of the story, but it says, there are 4 races in the world. There's the black man, or we said something about Afro brothers and sisters. He is the oldest, and he has the gift of song. Okay. Well, you can translate that to mean that wherever there's movement, talking about flux, energy forces, and so on, just like singing makes sound, hey, there's life. So, the brown man is the second oldest. He has the responsibility about the land. Say, and in our relationships with Canada, with the governments, federal and provincial and local governments, what do we talk about? All the political talks that we in meetings we engage in, we're always talking about the land. It always comes down to that land. Okay. The yellow man is the third oldest. He has the responsibility for the body. Next time you go do yoga and so on, think about that. The white man is the youngest and is still maturing. But his responsibility is bringing us all together. Have you ever thought why the white man is all over the world? has decided to be all over the world, try to colonize everybody on the globe. Whereas Blackfoot, hey, this is our territory, this is our traditional territory, and we've never decided to leave it. We stay with our territory. But the white man wanted to be all over. Colonizing, all the lands and so on. But being young, he is foolish, daring, does crazy things, things like bad kids and so on, yeah. See, does crazy things, but he will grow up. The young people say, be patient, he'll grow up and mature to fulfill his responsibility. So we will have to be patient. In other words, his duty is to eventually bring us all together. See, maybe that's the reason why he's all over. See. So, Homo sapiens, that's us, especially the youngest of you, maybe you should wear moccasins so you won't make such big imprints on the land. That's if you want us to be around in 10,000 years. The road we're going, hey, I'm not sure about that. We need the buffalo to help us make it to 10,000 years. Thank you. Questions or comments if you want, we'll be glad to try and answer.
That's a hard act to follow. Things I was gonna say and have to think about now. And that's how it should be, right? Thank you very much, Dr. Little Bear. That was very thought-provoking. And we have a lot of heart here at AWA, but sometimes we always need reminders, right? And it's good to get that reminder. And you did it in such an eloquent way that you made us all appreciate what you were trying to say. So thank you very much. For those who don't know me, I'm Deborah Donnelly. I'm the executive director here, so yeah, my title. But I'm an environmentalist. I grew up in the bush, and I feel that my work here at AWA is a way to serve my country and the planet. And so I feel grateful for this job. And I've only been here in Alberta for 15 months. But I was working in Yukon prior to that, and I'm one of the white people that have lived and worked in a lot of different places in the world, but I think it's given me insight and the ability to work with a lot of different cultures. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here now working in this room. So what I want to do is first ask if there are any questions for Dr. Little Bear. Yes, Carolyn.
Yeah, thank you. Leroy, you mentioned about English being a language of nouns. Could you tell us just a little bit more? Yeah, if you were to describe, the Blackfoot language, could you tell us how the language embodies the worldview and the relations?
Be back all night. The way I would put it is that our language is, colonizes our thinking process, okay? And let me give you a couple examples. My amethyst has been, you know, taught this, and this is one of her best, you know, favorite examples. You know, we mentioned pet dogs and so on. Okay. Well, in English, because we're about nouns, you know, English language is very good for categorizations, organization, naming things, nouns, and so on. Very good for that. Okay. But not a very good language for action, processes, movement, and so on. So the example about the dog is in English, because it's about certainty, coming to the point. A dog is a dog is a dog is a dog, so on. See. But in Blackfoot, we say what we would call dog, imitao. Okay. Well, if you ask a Blackfoot speaker, another Blackfoot speaker, to translate that to, you know, dog, imitao, to translate that to English, he would, you know, just say, oh, it means dog. Okay. But if you look at the deep meanings of imitao, what it really means is a being of some kind, we don't specify, okay, but it's a being of some kind on the move. Okay. Why? Well, because go back to that notion of flux, things change and so on. So it could appear like this, you know, the anthropomorphic aspect, you know, it appears like this. That's how I see this being, but it could change anytime because of that flux. See, so in other words, we don't limit ourselves to the existing anthropomorphic aspect. We say, hey, it's a being of some kind that's on the move. So it could change. Another example is very simple phrase. I'm going to lay down, okay, implying I'm tired, I'm going to lay down. Okay. Well, okay, don't have to really explain that in English, okay? But if we were to translate that into Blackfoot, we would say, it just talks. And when you look at the deep meaning, which is all about process, action, so on, it really speaks to, and at first it sounds funny, but that just really translates to, I'm gonna make myself thin. I'm gonna make myself thin. Okay. Well, if you think back to those metaphysics paradigmatic notions, okay, all about process, all about energy forces, okay. So when I'm standing erect, hey, all those forces will be hitting me, those energy forces will be hitting me, going through me, that might start playing around with my internal ecological balance and so on. See? So by making myself thin, if I lay down, if I make myself thin, a lot of those weight, those energy forces are not going to get there. a whole lot less. See? And just think about that I'm wearing an iWatch. Okay, well, just think about all the electromagnetic radiation going through you just with an iWatch. See? And what that over a long period of time, talking about slight differences, make for a drastic change. Those electromagnetic forces begin to change the DNA in humans. So the changing of the DNA, hey, maybe we're going down the Neanderthal road. See, I'm going to be a different being when that DNA is changed. See? So that's, those are examples of a very different way of thinking. To make myself think, even now, so those are, if you want to call them language traditions, intellectual traditions arising out of a very different way of thinking, see? And when we said at the beginning, a true leader changes the conversation. See? So we need to change the paradigms, we need to go through paradigm shifts and so on. See? And like I told quantum physicists, hey, if you want some new ideas, speak Blackfoot, learn Blackfoot. Because an example we give is, this is not Blackfoot, but I know it to be similar, but a linguist studying Navajo, a Dene language, like just out here, Sarsi, over here, Tsutina, are Dene speaking? Well, the very simple phrase, a verb phrase in English, to go. Okay? How many different ways can you conjugate the verb to go in English? Well, in Navajo, in a Dene language, you can conjugate the verb to go. Think about this. 350,000 different ways. Actually, 354,000 different ways. Well, the Oxford English Dictionary, which we're all familiar with, I don't think it has 1 million words yet. Each of you getting close to it, maybe it has surpassed it. But 1 million words plus or minus, okay? Well, think about a Dene language. It would take 3 verbs to surpass the Oxford English Dictionary. That's how rich these indigenous languages are. And because we can explore things in all those 350,000 different ways, I don't need mathematics. Because mathematics is just another language that the English language cannot cope with. So we adopt another language, mathematics, to be able to explain. Say, while in Blackfoot, in Dene, you don't need to borrow another language. And I'll tell you one more. Yeah, I told you, you have all night. If I said in English, dynamics without motion, that's an inherent contradiction. See? But talking to a Haida elder, okay, make a long story short, talking to a Haida elder, we brought up the notion of dynamics without motion. And he thought about it a little bit, then all of a sudden he says, oh, easy to explain. Okay, easy to explain. He said, take a canoe and go out on the ocean, because they're coastal people. Go out in the ocean and be far enough away from the ocean, I mean, from the land, or you can't see the land anymore. And use it as a reference point. In other words, if you can be out in the middle of the ocean. He said, you know your canoe is moving because you're rolling it. You know it's moving. But 360 degrees around you, you're always the same distance from the horizon. Since that's dynamics without motion. See, but in English, it's not possible. So that's where, you know, scientific thought, okay, begins to figure in. And so the way we've been trying to explain the notion of wilderness, ecological balance, and so on, is, hey, if you're looking out the window, it's like, you know, Western science is like looking out through that one window. Well, you do see what's out there, but you only see what the window will allow you to see. Well, if you were to expand that window with Dene or Blackfoot, you'll have a much bigger window. You'll have a whole lot more to see out there. And consequently, you might come up with new scientific discoveries. You might come up with creative thinking that would not otherwise be possible looking through the one window. So those are the kind of things that arise from our, you know, language and how it colonizes us. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions?
We need help from the buffalo. Said to get some moccasins. But how do we talk to the buffalo? Not talk to the buffalo, but listen carefully to the buffalo. What's your best way, your best advice?
Well, what we've been saying is that the buffalo is really an eco-engineer. It changes the land and so on. And if you watch buffalo and studied them, lived with them, and moved with them, you'll find, for instance, every once in a while, sometimes we refer to it as the buffalo are dancing. The buffalo would start running around all over the place. What they're really doing is cultivating the land and so on, and so that there would be new and fresh growth and so forth. And they do that in different places because the buffalo traditionally moved from the mountains, all come out on the plains, then by winter, they're back into the mountains for shelter, and so on. And we followed the buffalo, that is plains people like Blackfoot, we followed the buffalo. We didn't come in front of the buffalo, they didn't follow us, you know, we followed them and so on. And it's such that, hey, wherever they are, it seems that in that movement, there's a whole bunch of synchronizations occurring. In other words, they moved over here, they move on, we follow. Hey, the medicine plants are ready to harvest. We move on. Oh, the berries are ready to harvest. See, wow, that's the, and they eco-engineer, and it's almost like they do that. And sometimes in a very lush green patch, open meadow and so on, they'll bypass it and keep moving. And then it's almost like that's their storage. They end up coming back to it and so on. So learning from that buffalo's movement and how it eco-engineers the land so on that it moves on. Hey, those are lessons we learn from. And that's why we're saying, hey, we need that buffalo south. If we're going to talk true conservation, true wilderness, that's the thing we need to follow and learn from that buffalo. Same way with the fish. Hey, the salmon over the other side of the mountains, they do the same with water. So that's why it's very important. And so our governments need to be educated about that. And hey, all of us are, have to all work together to educate those politicians. That
what a privilege. I think we'll call it there, but I do want to thank Dr. Little Bear. That was an amazing talk, and I will be drawing from some of your phrases for many years, I'm sure. I would also like to thank Mike Judd, sorry, Gail and Nathan. Congratulations and well-deserved honor for all 5 of you. I would like to thank the awards committee. So we have a committee of people who get together and make decisions about who's worthy, I guess, in our view. And that is Cliff Wallace, Jim Campbell, Nathan Schmidt, and our outreach and communication specialist, Amy Tucker, and myself. So thanks to the awards committee for their all their work in selecting these people, but also putting an event like this together. And we're so glad that people are coming in person to events again. We love having people here. We do have lots of other events lined up, so check out our website. I would like to thank the volunteers that we have this evening. So we have Katarina and Valentina and Ethan. Thank you so much for coming. Your efforts, like the efforts of all the volunteers that work with AWA, make us stronger. So thank you so much for coming. If you're not a member of AWA, please consider becoming a member. Our voice against those politicians is only as loud as our membership. So we really appreciate the support through a membership, which is quite economical if you compare us to a lot of other groups. So check out our website. We do have one event coming up soon. It's Lauren Fitch, who's a long-term, well-known biologist here in Alberta, has just published a new book. It's called Streams of Consequence, and he's going to be doing a book reading here on November 28th. So if you're interested, please come to attend that. I would also just like to point out that I apologize that our parking lot wasn't available. We've had some foundation leakage, some water leakage into our foundation over the last few years, and we're trying to address it. I don't know if you all know, but this is a heritage building. It was a school at one point, a primary school. And so, we have the responsibility to, keep the history of this building alive, and so that's why there's a lot of construction going on the south side of our building. Our heritage, gurus in the province and the city, have been supporting the process as we move through the construction. But it's gonna be quite costly for a nonprofit like us, even with grant support. So if you know of anyone, or if you have some extra money pre-Christmas that you wanna get rid of, you would have to take your donations. And that, you know, I'm paid to do that, right? I think that's part of my job, is asking. And, so I just wanna finish the evening off that way. And like Jim started out thanking the staff, I would very much like to thank our, board members who are all volunteers and give so much to AWA. I just feel privileged to work with them, just like I'm privileged to work with our staff on a daily basis. Our annual general meeting is tomorrow morning, so if you're a member and you wanna come, it starts at 8:30 right here. So, please feel free to come.
You obviously don't want anybody to come because.
That's right, that's why it's at 8:30.
In your sleeping bag, stay away.
I'd also like.
I'll be here.
You used the word eloquence, and I heard a talk by Chief. Who? Yeah, got a great memory for names. Yeah, Chief Dan George. I happened to go, I was living on the coast 53 years ago when I first came to Canada. And I went to a potlatch, I think it was, and they were smoking salmon. And he gave a speech, and I bought his book, and I just heard another eloquent speech that reminded me of it, and it was today by Leroy. And I'd like to thank him, and I will probably be 100 when I will still be trying to speak like that. The secret of the fish.
So there's still food, there's still beverages, so feel free to stick around and ask questions and talk to people, and we're happy to be the host this evening. Thank you very much.
3 seconds, don't forget your packet.
Yes.
Yes.